Welcome, Gyno-Curious listeners. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Novat. From both sides of the speculum, we are here to investigate what it means to be a healer and to be healed. Please let me know what you're thinking about Gyno-Curious. Send us any inquiries to gynocurious@gmail.com or to radiofreerhinecliff.org. Please give us 5 stars, like us, share with whomever you want to share with, and whatever app you are listening to us on. So please give us your feedback. So my next guest may feel a bit unrelated to GYN care or women's health, but let me tell you why I've invited Kimmy Berlin to the show today. After years of listening to women speak about the challenges of relationships, communication issues with their heterosexual partners, and difficulty discussing kind of all things that are emotional with male-identified partners, I thought we might dive a little deeper into this issue and discuss why some grown men lack emotional intelligence by looking back to what they learned as boys. So, Kimmy Berlin is my guest today, and she is here to speak to us about her work and the organization she founded in 2019 called Build Up Boys that supports the emotional life of boys and their caregivers. I guess what I'd like to start with, Kimmy, please, is just tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you come to start this company?
So my son, when he was in the TWOS program, started crying, and the head of the program said to him, "I like it better when you don't cry."
This was a school kind of
like the
setting?
head of the pre-K was
Oh,
like, "I
my
like
goodness.
you when you don't cry."
Ooh.
And I was like,
Ooh.
that is fucked up.
Yeah.
So my now ex-husband, who's a comedy writer and cuts off anything that's intimate or emotional through humor, has been in therapy forever and was like, I don't want our son to, be that way.
Right.
And so he went up to her and was like, listen, we're trying to give our boy permission to feel his whole range of emotions. And we would appreciate if you don't shut that down. And she kind of looked at him sideways like, okay, your little snowflake of a child, like really like it was a problem.
Yeah.
And at that point, I was like, what is there for young boys that teaches boys how to be interpersonally curious, right? Which girls are kind of like that way in utero and expected and can read faces. And I know you're interested, you're nodding, like I see your face, and the boys aren't encouraged to be interpersonally curious and to know about their own emotional landscape and how to navigate theirs and others. And so I started looking for programs, and all the programs I found were middle school through adulthood, and they were all violence preventive. So the messaging was, you are bad. Biology is destiny. We have to tamp this down in you. Basically, like it didn't say on the website, but it was like, you're going to rape and kill us. So let's figure that out. And I realized all boys are given the message so early on that they are inherently bad. And to me, when you are treated like you're inherently bad, that fills you with shame. And then you become what people think you are. Right?
Yeah.
Like if you're acting from a place of shame, not love, I don't think you're an empowered person. So I was like, okay, so this doesn't exist. And I'm a passionate mom, and I have a background in acting, and I'm an author and writing coach. And so I was like, I'm going to just try to do this and build this curriculum. And so I did. And then COVID happened. And so I wasn't able to get it on its feet because it's play-based. And so I started interviewing experts. And so I've interviewed all the major experts in this realm. And that was really like getting a PhD in this stuff. So it was amazing.
So what is the age of the boys that the company attends to? Or
Pre-K through 5th grade. We have a middle school curriculum, but I'm really focused on young because research shows, I've become friends with Dr. Judy Chu. She's a researcher out of Stanford, and she's the one who's done the only study on young boys 4 or 5. And that's when she started to notice that boys actually come into this world with all of the skills they need. They know how to tune. They know how to have access to all of their emotions. And then that's stripped away from them, because to be a boy means you don't cry. To be a boy, it means that you have to reject anything that's female. And because we live in such a homophobic, misogynistic country, that happens so early on. And then once you don't have access to your heart, it's really hard to get that back, you know?
Indeed.
And so the program really is focused on helping young boys retain their emotional intelligence. So the assumption, and I think what makes this program different, is that we're treating boys like they are inherently good and beautiful human beings, and we just want them to hold on to that.
I love that. Thank you for that mission.
Thank you.
You know, it struck me that babies, just to kind of reiterate but in a different way, babies come into the world, no matter what gender they are, whatever external genitalia they have, without racism, ageism, sexism, none of the isms, right? And so I think you answered the question. It sounds like at around 4 to 5, male-identified folks are beginning to get the messages that you're describing, you know, the misogyny, the patriarchy, the I'm going to be other than the girl in the playground. Is that true? About 4 to 5 is when it happens.
Yeah, so kindergarten to first grade. So 4, 5, 6, like that's around when it happens. And it's interesting because girls deal with gender pressure in a different way. They're told around that age that they're not as smart as boys, that they can't do certain things, you know, but there are all these programs for girls that are helping girls fight the gender pressure. Girls Who Code, Girls on the Run, Girls Leadership. Like there are so many amazing programs that help girls break through that. And now they're doing amazing work, you know, in the world. And boys don't have that support. The dearth of programming is astounding for young boys that's not sports related.
It's such a, in a way, a paradox, isn't it? That we've lived in a world of patriarchy for thousands of years and assumed, if you will, with that men have always had this advantage. And yet there is such a disadvantage to a lack of emoting, a lack of emotional intelligence, that only now we're beginning to say, hey, we got to attend to this, because men have this wonderful opportunity to live lives fully in all the spectrums, not just in sports and in, power, and that the emotional intelligence gives them so much, if you will, empowerment, as you mentioned. So let's talk about emotional intelligence. How would you define that?
I would define emotional intelligence as the ability to be able to recognize what you're feeling in your body, be able to label that emotion with a granular feeling word, because the research shows that the more granular feeling word you have to describe what you're going through, the better able you are to process that feeling, the ability to advocate for yourself and express that feeling, and then being able to connect and work through repairing ruptures. So to me, it's that, again, like understanding your emotional landscape, taking responsibility for it, and then connecting with someone else and being able to truly like show up in an honest, open way.
It's the most, in a way, wonderful definition of empathy I've ever heard. I love the idea that you're describing this experience, granular feeling in the body. And again, part of what happens for so many of us, I don't care what gender it is, we start to dissociate our feelings, what I call intuition, insight. And, you know, women have at least been given the honor of a women's, intuition. Men are not given that blessing, if you will, or the honoring of that feeling. It's just shut down.
And they're so celebrated for being rational, right? For being like smart, rational people and not being emotional, right? And then women are judged for being emotional. Right. So there's this kind of hatred of women across the board. Women can hate themselves for being emotional and not really have a good relationship with that. And men can hate anything in them that feels feminine or female, whatever that is. Niobe Way, a PhD doctor who's done the most longitudinal research out there on pre-adolescent boys. She's amazing. And she has this great quote that's, "We have taken the human need for connection and we have genderized it and demeaned it." And I just love that. There's just something so beautiful about that.
And succinct. Whew,
Yes.
it just cuts to the core.
Yes. And then Judy Chu also has a gorgeous, succinct thing. She said, boys trade in their humanity for social currency at a huge relational cost. And I also love that. So to me, that is the heart of the problem. And people are flagging the problem. I don't know if you've seen, but like there are articles and books and people are like talking about the boy crisis.
Yeah.
Because they're not doing well in school. They're not going to college at the same rates. Young women take up the biggest percentage of home ownership. Like men are not doing well. A lot of women are leaving marriages because they feel that they don't have the emotional depth that they need, that they're doing all the emotional heavy lifting. And so there's a crisis.
Have you noticed the patriarchy is not working?
No, it's not for men, women, for anybody.
Any of us.
Yeah.
That's right. On every single level of our existence, if you will.
And
So,
I think of
yeah.
it, I was going to say, I think of it as dominance based. So even women can participate in dominance based interaction and relational interaction. And I saw that because we just got this huge Kumat grant and we reached, 75 boys this last spring across 9 sites. And we were at Boys and Girls Club in Newark and in Patterson, and we were at some other places like cooperative schools. So we got a wide range of socioeconomic and racial diversity. And something that I noticed in all the groups, whether I was co-facilitating or watching someone facilitate, was that trying to dominate and control the boy. Like if I can control you and get you to shut up, then I can teach you. And that's not how we come from, but I co-facilitated with a counselor at the school because that was interesting to me to learn that the mental health counselors in all the programs, they're the big advocates for this program. I thought the parents would be the champions, but it's been the mental health counselors who really know what a problem this is. And so I was co-facilitating with one, and she spent a lot of time, like I love her, but she spent a lot of time trying to settle them down.
Physically settle them down.
I mean, she wasn't like hands-on, but she was just like, come on, we have someone here. She's bringing this programming. It's really fun. If you could just, she didn't say shut up, but basically that was it. If you could just like stop wiggling and shut up and like listen. And yes, listening is something we have to learn. And we kind of do fun listening exercises where it's like, we do this like exercise called cross the line. And you have to cross the line if you like pizza, or cross the line if you have a sibling, or cross the line if you like rain. But you have to pay attention to who's crossing the line and who's not, as a way of paying attention to the specifics about people and remembering those specifics, because that's the foundation of a good friendship, to be like, oh, I remember you're allergic to eggplant, or I remember this thing. And so while it's important to get boys to listen, I think so much of it is dominance based that there's very little delighting in boys. And that is something that I noticed, how important it is for boys to feel delighted in, and how you're going to get so much more participation when they feel delighted in versus dominated.
It's so interesting. When you started that discussion about dominance, I thought you were talking about the boys being dominant or girls being dominant. You're talking about the adult in the room.
Yes.
Wow.
And a woman.
Yeah.
A woman and a mental
yeah.
health counselor.
Yeah.
So just to talk about having young boys, 3rd grade boys in a group, they're fucking crazy, right? Like they're like, it's really like herding cats.
Oh, you're caging them in.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's that tricky balance of how do you get to participate and have fun without ruining the kid's spirit, without going into that patriarchal dominance approach.
Right.
And I think so much of our society is about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, which speaks, and we're not going to go into it too much, about the dysfunction in our school systems.
Oh, yeah.
And that, you know, some of this gender stuff starts obviously in school, but it also starts in the home. And you know, there's just so many years of that implicit bias and gender expectation that we have to work on. And it's interesting. I'm thinking about the Barbie movie.
Yeah.
There was so much interesting conversation, whether you like the movie or not. The movie engendered conversation about the role that toy had in kids' lives, both boys and girls. And I thought that was a really important conversation. But certainly what it exposed, of course, is again the gender split that happens when if a boy plays with a doll, oh no, no, oh no. If a girl doesn't play with a doll, oh no, oh no.
Right.
Yeah.
I loved that opening scene in the movie where like all the girls are like killing the dolls.
Oh,
and being
absolutely.
like, don't tell me.
Space Odyssey.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. It was brilliant,
It was
actually,
really,
I thought.
Yeah, it was really, really great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it happens really early and it's unconscious. It's like racism.
Yeah.
People,
Yeah.
what I've learned is that people never have a bad intent. They want to protect their sons. So the desire to not make them soft really comes from a place of, I don't want my kid to be bullied. I don't want my kid to be hurt. I want them to be able to keep up with what's expected. And so you don't want your kid to be the only one who's emotionally, present and rich and can advocate for himself and be teased and bullied, right? So I get that tricky position as a parent. And yet I've watched it work on my kids. And I'm not saying I'm an amazing parent. I mess up all the time. But their ability to know how they're feeling in their bodies and express it and advocate for themselves. Like my 8-year-old son's therapist was like, I don't know, adults don't know how to do this, right? Like he's so good at feeling what he feels, working through it, finding a solution and moving on. It's so
Bravo
great.
to him and to you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's important also, you were talking about the disconnection of body and emotion I think for parents and this program especially to help boys make that connection. So if Milo, let's say, like when he was a lot younger, he'd be feeling something and we were going to a play date and he was like, I'm feeling really nervous. And I'm like, okay, where are you feeling that in your body? Trying to get him in the moment to connect it.
Yeah.
He's like, I feel it in my eyeballs. It's like, okay, so what I was really expecting, but okay, great.
But the corollary to that, isn't it, Kimmy, is that when so many kids will say, I don't want to go to school today, I don't feel well, and you'll say, well, what's going on? They'll say, oh, I have a tummy ache or I have a headache. And you realize the tummy ache is about the bully at school, or the headache is about the homework they just could not grasp. And we also haven't taught them how to look at the body and its manifestations and how that's an expression of emotions too. I mean, most adults don't know how to do that.
Right.
They experience symptoms, physical symptoms, and they dissociate the way they're feeling physically with what's going on emotionally. So your website speaks to the caregivers too.
Yes.
What are you doing with the caregivers?
So there's a curriculum, and we really have to figure this out, how to get more caregiver buy-in. One, you have some people who respond to it like, don't feminize my son, right? They think this work is about feminizing their son. Oof. And that's not what it's about. It's about empowering your son to be a better human, to have better relationships, which is going to help your son in school, on the field, in a lab, at a company. Like, all interpersonal power is just going to help you.
That's right.
And so that's going to be a big challenge, I see, this company as we scale, to really let caregivers know that that is not what we're doing. The other thing is that caregivers have to look at their biases, right? There's so many unconscious biases. So I have a lot of writing prompts as the writing teacher in me. I have a lot of writing prompts that's like, tell me about a man in your life who had what you consider a feminine emotion, right? Like admitting shame or insecurity or crying, and how did you respond to that, right? And so really reflecting on what you've seen in your life, your relationship with men. I happened to listen to your interview with Norm and how you were with that one, there was a man that you were with who totally put you down, shut you down, and made you feel like you couldn't do something, and how so many women have those experiences with men, and then they become mothers of sons. And how do you work through, whether you've been raped, whether you've been put down, whether you've been squashed, like whatever it is, how do you then process that and love your son open-heartedly, having worked through that stuff? I mean, that's a really, really hard task.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of it is encouraging people to look at those moments and bring them out of the darkness into the light.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it is there are big ideas for each lesson. So our faces and bodies show emotion. How do we read someone's face? Again, I think girls and women are really good at this, and they'll know like the subtleties, even in an eyebrow twitch. They're going to be like, okay, I understand this, you know, and so to teach boys that. And so then there's an exercise that parents can do at home that's like, hey, when you go to the grocery store, play guess that emotion. What do you think that person's feeling, right? And so there are learnings that the parent and caregivers can do to help the boys reiterate that. The other thing about the granular feeling words, we give the caregivers a list of words. And my assumption, and I've kind of seen this play out, is boys aren't going to have a really big feeling in group with other boys, but they're certainly going to have it at home. So if you're dealing with your boy having like a huge emotional reaction, you have the ability to be like, where are you feeling that in your body? What's the right word? How can we, you know, do this? And so to help the parents support their boys in that way.
I love that your professional arc comes from writing, because what we're talking about starts with language, right? So much of what our children learn from us early on, particularly, yes, are the quiet moments too. But so much of it is the language that we use. She plays with dolls. He plays with trucks, even before they know what dolls and trucks are, so to speak, right? And so giving people language, giving care providers and the boys language, words to kind of suss out, to kind of articulate how the feelings behind it is brilliant. It's just brilliant because it in a way, and bear with me and correct me if I'm wrong, but it actually takes the emotion out of it initially. Yeah. It just says, okay, what does this word mean to you? Yes. And what are the gender implications? And then kind of titrating it down to this beautiful place of where I'm feeling it emotionally, I'm feeling it physically, and what do I do with that? And I applaud you. I think it's just brilliant.
Thank you. I mean, part of COVID really helped me because I interviewed so many people. I really got, you know, because I don't have a PhD in child development psychology. Like I don't have that education. So to have Dr. Niobe Way and Dr. Judy Chu read my curriculum and vet it and give comments on it has just been incredible. So a lot of what you're talking about, like that's the research out there. So it's like, okay, that's the research. Let's integrate that into the program. Another big thing is how connected the body is with the emotional life and how, as you were talking a lot about, and I'm sure you see in your practice, the physical manifestations of emotional, what's the word, like lack of understanding, you know, because I'm going through perimenopause, often will lose words. But yeah, just that being able to really understand and capture it. I was going to also say, yes, language is important, but I feel like my acting background has been really great because it was so body based. Yeah. And so to be able to read someone without having the words or language. Yeah. And one of the exercises, we have a whole class on how voices can show emotion. And something I find really fascinating is when someone's voice doesn't match their words and what that reveals about someone. And to give boys the tools to understand that, and they thought that was really fun because it'd be like we would do this like, you know, exercise where I'd be like, hey me, it's really great to see you.
Oh like, yeah, sure.
Right. And how my voice is not, you know, matching the it's great to see you. Right. And how important that is to really be able to know how someone is feeling and thinking, and to also be able to call someone out and say, you know, you're saying you're happy to see me, but that's not what I'm feeling. Like what's going on? And again, going back to that interpersonal curiosity, because so much of why I think relationships, whether they be friendships, romantic, sexual, all of the above, don't work is that people aren't honest with how they feel. And there are so many games and there are so many like assumptions about what someone means. And like, why not just ask?
It's, again, what you're speaking to is the kind of the intersectionality of all of this, of culture, language, body movement, physicality, in a way that is, well, is honoring to all of these things, is pointing out how important it is the relationship of these parts of our lives, and how divorced we are from some of these parts in our lives, and for a variety of reasons. And the idea of starting at such a young age with a group of people, boys, who have been so historically raised to divorce themselves, again, is just such a wonderful mission. And
I want to jump in and
please.
say, not only encouraged to divorce themselves, but then parents end up feeling like, oh, my boy's so easy. He doesn't have any problems.
Oh, I know.
And it's like, actually, he does. He's just not talking to you about it, right?
That's right.
And so Peggy Orenstein has this great book called Boys and Sex, and she interviews boys in college. And she's like, what's hookup culture like? Well, how are you feeling? What's your heart like? You know, there's a chapter called like the feminist fuckboy and how he uses like, you know, all the language, woke language to just basically get into someone's pants. But all the boys across the board were like, you're the first person who's asked how I feel. Like, you're the first person who's asked like what my heart's doing. And just a lot of times people assume, well, I can't ask my son that. You know, I can ask my daughter that. I can't ask my son that. And so how important that is also for parents to know that if your boy seems easy, it's probably because he's not talking about the stuff going on.
Yeah. So with all that you know, do you think that there's a possibility we can take an older cohort of male-identified humans and teach them emotional intelligence, even if they've gone through decades without having access to it?
Yes, I do. There has to be a willingness to want to do that, and you can't control that.
Yeah.
So to me, the willingness comes from, am I going to lose this relationship? Am I going to lose this job? Like, there's this thing in the addiction world that talks about you're only as sick as your secrets. And so often addicts will rely on substances and not people. And so something has to get so bad in someone's life that something's not working that they're like, I'm willing to do this. So I think willingness has to be like up there. And I think because so many women are leaving relationships because they're not emotionally connected or feeling satisfied, that is a motivating factor. Also, we're finding that men are not reporting mental illness or needing, like, going on medication. There's some crazy stat that's like, men won't do that, or men won't seek out therapy or tell their bosses that they need a mental health break. So there's work around that. There's this guy, Michael Kasdan, who is a friend of mine, who is in the law world. And he talks a lot about how that toxic culture creates depression, and that he had a breakdown, and he wrote about it, and how amazing that was as a lawyer to write about his mental breakdown. And now he's developing a nonprofit that talks to other lawyers about the toxic psychological culture that's happening. So I feel like, again, that to me, the older stuff is dealing with a problem, right? Like we're intervening. We're coming in and we're helping you with your problem. And I think why I like starting young is because it's not treating the boys like they're a problem, right? We're you know what? You got this. And we're just reminding you that you got this. And we're going to help you hold on to this. And I think that that's the difference. But yes, I do think that men and women can learn how to be better in relationship, how to know themselves better. I'm doing that. Like, I grew up in the 70s. I'm going to be 52. And my dad was born in 38. And his kids were not going to be in therapy. Like, therapy's for the weak. And when I started getting emotional around my period, it was like, you're so disappointing. You're being so female. And so that was what I grew up in. And I had a lot of trauma in my childhood with a sick brother. And I didn't understand the nervous system. And now there's all talk about like how to calm your nervous system. What I wouldn't have given to like know that at 10, 11, like to know how to calm my own nervous system. And so when I have big triggers, which I do, how can I regulate? Right. So I'm learning that again, but I'm motivated to learn that because I really want to have good friendships and good relationships and be present with my kids.
Yeah. You've mentioned so many wonderful things that I want to tap into, but I was going to ask you. You described how your your son's experiences was part of the nidus and for creating this company. But I want you to know whether you did have a brother or brothers, and it sounds like you did. And I'm just curious whether, when you look back at the home life, you just described your father's tendencies, et cetera, and the time in which we grew up, how much of that kind of imparted or crystallized the need to create this company as well?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It was a huge motivation, but also because we didn't have the script. So
Right.
my ex-husband, comedy writer, very confused about emotions, he didn't know what to do.
Right.
And I am estranged from my brother, and we're not able to repair our ruptures. And I've developed a really good relationship with my dad in recent years, but it was really fraught for a long time. And so, yeah, there was this feeling of like, how do I do this differently?
Yeah.
Right. And where are the scripts, and how do I do it? And how do I give my kids the skills they need to have better relationships, to be more self-possessed, to be empowered from the inside out? Because that's the other thing, like we were talking about dominance before. I interviewed this guy, Mark Wynn, who is a police detective, and he deals with domestic violence, and he was a survivor of domestic violence. And he talks a lot about how when men lash out, and whether they rape or kill or, do anything extreme, it's not when they feel empowered, it's when they're losing their power.
That's right.
Right. And so if my feeling is, if you feel empowered from the inside, you can share your power with someone. And if you don't, then you're going to want to have power over the person. And so that is what I would like in my life for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly would change the political environment of the country and the world, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It strikes me that, in a way, you brought up the idea that people feel like emotions and rationality are two separate, divergent events. And for me, it feels so important to start saying out loud, emotions are not irrational. They're, in fact, a rational response to the world around us.
I love that.
And that it's kind of like, this is survival. This is about saying, okay, there's danger over there. I'm going to feel a certain way. And, flight and fight, or deep breathe, all these things. So
it's information.
It's information, and it's astute information, right?
Right.
But then the minute you start saying it's irrational, it's not important.
It's hysterical.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. And women's, in the world of women, you just delegitimize it. You create judgment around it, and all of a sudden it's irrational.
And then you lack access to that information that can help you make really important decisions, like who feels safe to be with and what job feels okay and all of those things. I just saw, I'm really into watching little memes and videos on Instagram, like different psychologists talk about different things. And I saw this thing this morning that was like, if you think about your emotions, like you don't want them driving the car, right? Because that is not going to help anybody. But you also don't want to stick them in the trunk where they're going to die. But they could be in the back seat where they're like, hey, like, I need this. And so you're paying attention to it, and it's part of it. But that goes to what you're talking about, the integration between the rational and the emotional, because then you're able to witness it and engage with it and feel it and process it, and then also know what you have to do. And so, I mean, I think that's why cognitive behavioral therapy works so well, because it is the connection between our thoughts often create emotions, or emotions can create cognitive distortions. Like that was a big thing for me that I learned when I did CBT, of like all or nothing thinking, or I feel this way, that must be the truth of it. Whereas like, no, you can feel something and that doesn't mean that's the truth.
Yeah.
Right. So, but to be curious about yourself and others in that way.
Yeah. It's reminding me, and please correct me, if there's a psychologist, Levine, who investigates a lot of children, and he describes this event where a group of kindergartners or first graders were kind of kidnapped by some evil person, taken and put in a basement. And what they realized was that the majority of kids just basically sat in their emotion of fear. But one little boy decided that he had to act. He had to do something. And he figured a way of getting out of the basement and helping them all escape.
It's amazing.
And what Levine realizes is that those who decide to act
on the
feeling were survivors and were kids who had less psychological trauma associated with that event. Were the kids who were paralyzed by fear, literally could not move initially, were those who were dealing with this trauma for years and years and years. And this feels analogous to what we're talking about, right? It's about identifying the feeling, having some response to it, not just suppressing it, not just, if you will, I was going to say stewing in it, but I don't. But like
it's like you're feeling scared of the feeling. Right. I think that often happens. Right. That you're like, well, I shouldn't feel angry, or I shouldn't feel this.
Right.
And so then that judgment makes it hard to act. So
yeah,
I love what you're saying. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So, are there data that Build Up Boys is generating to help show that what you're doing is working?
Yeah, so that's what we just did this past spring, a huge efficacy study. So we did pre-surveys and post-surveys of the boys and of the caregivers to see if we've moved the needle at all. And so we're getting initial feedback, and some of the initial feedback is, I want people to know Build Up Boys is fun. And then someone else is like, I learned that I can tell people's feelings without words. I learned how to control my body, like those kinds of things. And then, so we're getting like actual feedback from the boys to see if there's been a difference. Something very interesting in the finding is that the older boys reported they got worse at some of the qualities. And our researcher, Dr. Laurel Felt, was like, that's actually a good thing, because when you don't know about anything, you misjudge your capacity, like you misjudge your ability and talent to do it. So
you need to unpack that better for us.
Okay, I'm going
please.
to.
Thank you.
In the beginning, an older boy, if asked,
and how old are we talking about?
This happened to be a 5th grader.
Okay.
So how well do you think you are able to identify your feelings? 1 to 5. 5. How well do you think you are at being able to describe your feelings? 5. How do you think you handle having a really big emotion? Can you read other people's emotions? 5, 5, 5, right? At the end of the 6-week course, 3, 2, 3,
interesting,
1. And so you'd think like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Like, how did they get worse? But what her assertion is that when you know something and you've been educated about it, you actually have better assessment.
That's right.
Right? And so it's actually a good thing, because it means now they know what's required of them and that they're on a journey. And so...
that's so provocative and fantastic, right?
Yeah, it's cool.
Because, and in a way, it's kind of, again, it's about looking at how the needle gets moved. And we just want to shift ideology. We want to shift dogma. And even if it seems to be in kind of, if you will, that reverse direction, it's so empowering. It's like, oh my gosh, we got through that armor. We got through that, the assumptions that that boy had, where he thought all, bear with me, I'm going to use a silly analogy, but, that all creatures coming out of the sea that have legs are octopi as opposed to starfish. It's like, oh, I'm going to really get granular.
Yes.
That's the word you use that is so, so important, because there's nuances and subtleties to all of our characters and all of our experiences. But being able to know the difference between an octopus and a starfish is important, right? Yeah. They're not the same.
They're not.
Right.
And I think it takes self-esteem to admit what you don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I think to be like, if someone's like, oh, could you unpack that? I'm not understanding you. Or like, I don't know words a lot of the time. So I'm like, what does that word mean? And I'm not embarrassed because I want to know.
Right.
And so I think that to even be able to admit what your weaknesses are is a huge step for these boys.
A milestone in so many, for all of us. I mean, most of us are terrible at experiencing failure or experiencing embarrassment or understanding how shame disempowers us and trying to figure all that stuff out. These are powerful human experiences. So if you can start doing it when you're in 5th grade, you're going to be a great, great person. You know, your adulthood is just going to be so different from those who have been raised before you. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the boys are saying that they feel like they want to be better friends. They want to be able to learn more words, that they understand their relational comfort physically. I do this fun exercise where it's like a version of red light, green light, where boys are facing each other. They're paired up. And one boy gets to say green light, and the other boy has no control over how close he has to get, and he's told to pay attention to his body and how close he gets. So a boy who's sensory seeking might be fine like touching noses, but someone who is sensory avoidant or, you know, from another culture, whatever it is, might have a completely different reaction. So they have to pay attention to how they feel in their body, and then they reverse it. And so now they're in control of how close the person gets. And so even something like that can help someone understand how they are in space, right?
Yeah.
In relation to other people.
Yeah.
So I really believe this stuff is going to help with consent issues later.
Yeah.
Because if you can read someone's face, if you can understand and respect like boundaries from one of the workshops, and this was before the efficacy study, I just had, once kids could get vaccinated, I did a group of first graders in my apartment. And one of those boys after the workshop went home and told his mother, I really would prefer you not kiss me on the mouth. It makes me uncomfortable. And that seemed so huge for me because that was his own comfort. We didn't even talk about kissing on the mouth. Like none of that came up in the curriculum.
Right.
But what did come up is you can advocate for yourself, and this is what physical comfort feels like.
Yeah.
And so he was able to do that. And she was a pretty progressive mom who thought she was doing everything right. And she's like, I didn't even think about that.
Right.
And so
Right.
that seemed huge to me, and
Yeah.
really hopeful that some things can shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And wouldn't it be lovely if we lived in a world where we didn't assume all men were dangerous and violent and potential rapists, where they could embrace their heart and their soul and their emotional expansive experience, because it would just benefit us all as a society and as a human species. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that you say in website, and we're coming to a close here, but I want to make sure we say it out loud, because I really love that the website speaks to vulnerability and authenticity. And that's what we've been talking about today. And, you know, there's a reason I have this from both sides of the speculum spiel.
Yeah, I love
because
that.
I like to think about how we have to look at how two people in a relationship are seeing each other and seeing themselves. And it's the absence of the ability to think about the other person is what we've been talking about the whole time. So as a gynecologist, I have to think about, how does this speculum feel to this patient? And I want the patient to be able to say to me as her clinician, hey, that doesn't feel good. That doesn't work for me. Because that's how I learn. That's how she learns. I mean, that's how we build trust. That's how we build empathy. That's how we are in relationship in a more positive way. So your company is doing it, and it's great.
I've been wanting to share this, so this is a great segue into it. I interviewed a woman who does a lot of relational work and helps parents with relational work so that their kids trust them. Because if their kids don't trust them and they don't have connection, discipline's really hard. Anything's hard, right? Like we need that basis.
Right.
And so she had this great analogy about wanting to make boys tough. And she said, if you think about a callus doesn't have access to blood. And so if a callus rips open, you actually can't heal yourself because you are not connected to your blood supply. And the most vulnerable places, when we get cut, blood comes, we're able to heal. You know, so I just loved that so much, that the idea that there is strength in vulnerability and there's healing in vulnerability, and that's actually what we need to move towards, not the hardening.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, beautifully put. Yeah. So I like to end these episodes with making sure that we honor pleasure in our lives.
Love it.
And that so many of us, particularly vulva havers, have talk about dissociated from pleasure.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we say it again out loud in the microphones and spread it to the world. So what do you do, Kimmy, for pleasure in your life?
I'm like, well, do I talk about masturbating?
We are all for it in this little arena.
Exactly. When you said the thing about pleasure, I was like, oh my God, did you see Mama Gina? Like, I've had so many like friends in my life who are like, I'm going to bedazzle my pussy.
That's right.
So pleasure, I would say recently I've been really into the gloaming and just sitting and letting the light get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer and feeling the peace in that because everything feels so overwhelming in my life. Like one of my kids is really grappling with a lot and I feel really powerless. And so any moments of peace that I can have give me great pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's part of why I asked the question, because the first place everyone goes to around the word pleasure is sex.
Is sex, yeah.
But I'm talking about that, yes, for sure, but also the expansive world of our lives, whether it be listening to the wind, painting a picture, listening to music. I like spending time with my dog, makes me laugh. I want us all to embrace that too, because the world is pretty heavy. And I want to also speak to something that you just were so honest about. Despite all of your knowledge and all of the work that you're doing, that parenting is hard.
So hard.
And that we all struggle with it. There is no perfect parent. And this conversation is about reminding us that we are all beautifully flawed. Yeah. Thank you, Kimmy. I'm so grateful you've been here in the studio with us today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to make sure that the audience hears that we haven't touched on?
I think everything was covered. I mean, something that I've been wanting to say during the whole episode is how much I love your voice. Oh. I'm like, that gives me pleasure. I'm like, let me just listen to you talk and then I'll just go to sleep. Yeah, it's so peaceful and awesome.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Yeah. And I want to remind the audience that to hear more about Kimmy Berlin's work, please go to buildupboys.org. And there's a lot of information there. It's a beautiful website, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
So I also want to thank you to my co-producers, Jen Hamoud and Maddie Rosenberg, and thank the Epicurean for being such wonderful hosts for Radio Free Rhinecliff. Please, until the next episode, stay well. Listen to your instincts and intuitions. They are the greatest of teachers, not to be ignored.